Without objection, further reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The representative is recognized for 5 minutes on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm introducing this amendment because I believe that it's extremely important that we acknowledge the fuller history here if we're going to look comprehensively at the United States-South African relations. And if this bill is going to criticize the South African government's decisions, some of which, as I said, I disagree with, just as there's a lot of disagreements that I have with the United States government and that we've had not only now, but over the years. But so therefore the record should also reflect the terrible decisions that were made in South Africa by South Africa's apartheid regime prior to 1994. Should be clear. So this amendment just restates the basic facts that an apartheid Afrikaner government ruled South Africa between 1940 to the 1990s. That government refused to grant political or civil rights to the nation's black majority. It is also true that this government, the apartheid government of South Africa, imprisoned Nelson Mandela for over 27 years.
The refugee resettlement program has always stood out as one of the most humane and compassionate policies in the United States, representing a rare area where Democrats and Republicans historically found common ground. Unlike many programs that shift direction depending on which party holds power, this one was built on a shared recognition that protecting people fleeing violence, war, and persecution is not just a political choice, but a moral responsibility. For decades, leaders from both sides of the aisle came together to uphold this tradition, showing the world that compassion is not confined to one ideology. The bipartisan nature of the program is what gave it such durability and respect, making it more than just another policy. It became a moral statement that America would stand as a refuge for the most vulnerable. This unity is even more striking considering how divided American politics often is. Immigration in particular has been one of the most contentious topics in U.S. history, with strong disagreements on borders, enforcement, and citizenship.
This apartheid government, who looked at black South Africans having no rights, no ability to vote, no ability to free movement. Yet the United States government did not sanction it. In fact, it was the last country to join to sanction South Africa after the rest of the world had done it. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment so that the record would be clear and reflect who and what South Africa represents in its entirety and not in just a limited viewpoint. Now yield back the balance of my time.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the middle of the night and in bad faith, Democrats introduced this amendment, which has no relevance to the underlying bill. The findings listed in my legislation call out the bad actions by the current South African government. And I don't see any role in going back and looking at past governments and the relationships previously. This is the current South African government and the U.S.-South African relations now. And the ranking member's amendment is nothing more, in my opinion, than an attempt to justify the ANC's egregious actions toward Afrikaner community. Arguing over findings language is frankly a waste of everyone's time, especially considering that findings do not have any bearing on actual law, and regardless, if this amendment were to be adopted, the ranking member would still continue to oppose the underlying bill. I encourage every member of this committee to focus on the relevant bill language and oppose this amendment. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The push for the amendment highlighted a deeper truth about refugee programs. They do not exist in isolation, but are closely tied to America's credibility. By demanding a clear account of spending, the amendment implicitly emphasized that the program is worth defending. Transparency would not weaken it, but instead strengthen its legitimacy, making it harder for critics to dismiss refugee resettlement as wasteful or mismanaged. In a political environment where opposition often uses financial arguments to undermine humanitarian efforts, such accountability measures could serve as a shield, showing that compassion does not come at the expense of responsibility. However, the amendment did not pass easily, and this rejection speaks volumes about the tension at the heart of U.S. policymaking. While supporters saw it as a necessary step toward reinforcing the program, opponents argued that it was misplaced within a bill concerning U.S. relations with South Africa. They viewed it as politically motivated, pointing out what they considered hypocrisy, highlighting the irony that some of the same lawmakers advocating for fiscal oversight abroad had overlooked massive spending on undocumented immigration issues at home. This clash revealed the dual pressures of domestic politics and international responsibility, with both sides using the amendment to advance broader narratives about priorities and accountability.
Without objection, further reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The representative is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My second amendment is a somewhat technical but nonetheless important fix. When we negotiate sanction bills, and I've negotiated many of them over the years, one of the foundational questions is whether the sanctions authority will be mandatory, the president shall do something, or permissive, he may do something. I've supported both types of sanction bills depending on the specific context in question. The world is not a simple place, and we need to adjust our policy levers to specific contexts. But let's be clear. The executive branch doesn't need to cite a legal authority as to why it is not sanctioning an individual when the underlying authority is permissive in the first place. Yet, as drafted, this bill is committing a basic logical error. Moreover, Global Magnitsky has a unique mechanism that allows the chairman and the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee to send a letter that the administration must respond to and reach a sanctions determination by law. The language in this bill muddies that established process. My amendment fixes these errors by striking a few words. So I urge all of my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Representative Pramila Jayapal reminded the committee that the refugee resettlement program has always been bipartisan, rooted in the shared understanding that America's role extends beyond its borders. This was not just about dollars, but about dignity, and about keeping faith with those who had trusted the United States to offer them safety. Her intervention underscored how abandoning or undermining such programs is not a simple policy shift. It represents a moral retreat, one that erodes trust both at home and abroad. If America is seen as a nation that reneges on its promises, it risks losing the credibility that has long been central to its global leadership. Jonathan Jackson's speech added another dimension, connecting the debate to broader historical and moral truths. By highlighting America's role in shaping the racial and social struggles of South Africa, he reframed the discussion as more than a single amendment about funding oversight. For him, the decision reflected whether the U.S. would acknowledge its responsibility in the larger narrative of global oppression and healing, or whether it would hide behind technicalities while turning away from humanitarian obligations. His words suggested that America's identity is not only tested by its domestic policies, but also by how it treats nations still grappling with the scars of injustice. The failure of the amendment to immediately pass showed the difficulty of aligning ideals with action. Still, the demand for a roll call vote ensured that this would not remain an abstract debate. Each member would be forced to publicly declare their stance, linking their name to either compassion or rejection. This heightened the symbolic weight of the issue, as it placed individual accountability at the center of a national and international conversation.
Yes, I thank Ranking Member Jacobs for offering this amendment, which requires the Department of State to report to this committee the amount of money our government is paying to resettle Afrikaners, refugees in the United States. This comes at the same time President Trump has blocked all other refugee settlements to the United States. That is a pretty remarkable when you think about it. Let that sink in. The United States is welcoming white Afrikaners from South Africa, many of whom will tell you they neither need or want refugee status, while we actively turn away people from war-torn countries and those escaping extreme human rights abuses and political violence. The American people deserve to know how much money of their taxpayer dollars are funding this political stunt of a refugee program. So I urge my colleagues to support Representative Jacobs' amendment that will give us much needed transparency. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Any other members seek recognition? Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to point out that this amendment was offered by my treasured colleague from California less than 15 minutes before the start of markup, and appears to be a last-ditch effort to criticize President Trump for his leadership in offering refuge and resettlement for legitimately persecuted Afrikaners. I fully support knowing where every dollar of taxpayer funding goes, but this report does not belong in a bill that reviews the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and South Africa. This amendment is also particularly ironic, given that Democrats had absolutely no issue with taxpayer dollars being used to transport millions of illegal aliens into the United States during the Biden-Harris administration. Even today, Democrats have taken no responsibility for the immigration crisis directly caused by these failed policies. I encourage every member of this committee to oppose this amendment. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.